This story is about an anti-hero named Oscar. His specialty is that he is talented in most types of martial arts, and is able to master new ones with just a touch. At the moment, the man is taking a bath surrounded by a bunch of beautiful ladies who are ready to do anything for his benefit. One of the girls came up with a brilliant idea to put one grape on her lips and thus feed him. Other ladies quickly picked up on this idea and began to repeat the same thing only with other food. When suddenly someone enters the room and interrupts the idyll with the story that the envoy of the sword seekers, George, has returned and is waiting for an audience. In response to this, to save himself the trouble, Oscar orders him to come in, and to demonstrate the purpose for which he has come. In general, he brought with him a sword called Xianyuan, which previously belonged to the emperor himself. Also, legend says that this sword was cast by the gods themselves. It simultaneously combined the sun, moon, stars, mountains, rivers, grasses, and trees. With its help can unite the whole world. After hearing this information, Oscar was pleasantly surprised, and immediately pulled his hand towards the sword, but as it turned out later, everything was not quite so simple. The thing is that Georgie came here, not just to hand over the sword, but to try to destroy Oscar, and take his place for himself. It took a lot of effort to make this sudden strike, but the man was surprised when it did nothing. In spite of its sharpness, and its great speed of flight, the sword simply stopped when it touched Oscar's head. To be honest, the guy was no less surprised, because first of all it was a technique that Georgie had never shown, and secondly Oscar didn't even notice how the sword was near his head. I wonder what the problem was, the weakness of the technique, or the lack of strength. From that moment on, Georgie had only one question in his mind: how a potential rival managed to stop this powerful attack, provided that he was doing nothing else but resting in the harem. In his opinion, it was also impossible to successfully master spiritual practices with such a lifestyle. In response to this, Oscar could not think of anything better than just laughing, because in fact the practice is as simple as possible, at about the level of eating, but for what reason no one but him can understand it. In general, the guy could not even imagine that with George could have such problems. But as it turned out, he is a mediocrity, and another obstacle in life, so after thinking for a long time it was decided to try this sword on him, which turned out quite well, after which Oscar made a conclusion that the material of this sword is really special, but there is no special power in it. As they say, legends are legends, so that people fiercely believe in them and pass from generation to generation. When George realized that his skills are significantly inferior, he said that in no way regretted his action. After all, it is better to try and fail than to endure a lifetime. As soon as the man had finished his last speech, Oscar did not hesitate to strike the decisive blow, and thus took his life. Then he asked to announce that Georgie had passed away because of his illness, and since he was a great master, he was buried with his honors. At this point the girls couldn't stop admiring their hero. They were just shocked at how strong he was, and really kind. Unfortunately, Oscar was not happy, because he didn't know what to do next. Of course, practice is good, but it's not the limit of dreams. Once his father told him that the magic birds sent a special child to this world, who just like Oscar is able to master any technique that comes into sight, no matter how difficult it was. When the child grew up and became an emperor, he reached the 30th level of mastery of spiritual energy, and has remained invincible ever since. But apparently it is impossible to find it except in myths and legends. The last hope was shattered exactly at the moment, when Georgie brought a sword that does not really have magic powers. From that moment on, for Oscar, legends are only legends. There are no magic birds or gods. And even more immortal cultivators who could prevent him from conquering and winning. All this routine, to put it mildly, has made Oscar feel tired and lonely. Suddenly, in the middle of the room, something very unusual began to happen. A bright light appeared, which, to put it mildly, could be blinded. Could this be the portal to heaven spoken of in myths and legends? Its shape is so unstable as if it were about to collapse, but heaven may not offer another chance. If that's the case, we must make a decision as soon as possible and get on the road. Before leaving, Oscar asked his girls to tell the Empress, when she returned, that all matters concerning foreign and domestic policy rested on her shoulders, and the Grand Master's. Of course, this whole venture was a great risk, but it was an opportunity that should never be missed. After the teleportation process, the guy found himself in a strange room. After looking around a bit on the monitor screen, he saw a message that said it was the end of the last chapter and the beginning of a new one. It's hard to explain what it means so far, but it's all to be sorted out in the near future. After reading what was written in the message, Oscar realized that it briefly described a novel called The Tyrant Emperor, but the funny thing about it was that it described Oscar's life completely. Also, after our hero went through the gate, in his memory began to remember fragments of information about the modern world, but so far he cannot believe that he managed to get into the real world from the book. In fact, up to this point, the guy was just a character in the novel, but now he can be considered a real live person. When the situation became a little clearer, it was decided to go to the other room and see what was going on there. Behind the door, Oscar found two people, a frightened girl, and a grown man who was about to disappear. At the moment when the old man's body began to gradually disappear, he cried out that the gods want to punish him, but from the expression on his face you can understand that the man is not going to give up, because he has done a lot of work to live to see today, and meet it worthily. The name of this gentleman Charlie. Many years of his life he was an ordinary internet writer that day in and day out lived a boring life, so lasted exactly until 3 years ago the man did not go with a tourist group in snowy mountains. The last thing he remembers from that moment is a huge avalanche coming down from the mountains. People's cries for help were drowned out by the sounds of falling ice and snow. At that moment Charlie fully felt the insignificance of the human race in comparison with the real harsh nature, which does not forgive mistakes. Just a few seconds after it all began, a blinding white light engulfed the man. The cold that had penetrated his brain completely corroded his consciousness, and the fear of losing his life took over his thoughts. But when it was all over, Charlie was insanely lucky. He was the only one of the group to survive. He could not even think that the survivors of the disaster can attract luck, but inexplicably in the process of trying to save himself and his life managed to find out that Charlie has acquired a magical power called Fantasy Eater. It allows you to summon any character from any work. The only disadvantage of this skill is that the characters do not obey him, but as it seemed to the man at first glance it is not so important, because when a character loses his life, his power and memory goes into the possession of Charlie. What to do with the resulting power the man did not think of, but some options allowed. Also, in addition to various characters, Charlie could attract to the real world and other things such as fictional events. Of course, the consequences of this he is not afraid, because he has enough power to take control at the right time, because it is comparable to the power of politicians or even a whole huge country. Our hero also knows that in this world there are other people with superpowers. Before he perceived it as just ridiculous rumors, but since then, when such abilities awaken even in him, these ridiculous rumors have become true for him. As time went on, Charlie found out that most of the other awakened ones had rather trivial abilities, such as fire breath, current control, summoning spirits, changing body structure, and so on. The boy truly believed that his ability was much better than the others. At least because it has no boundaries. The premise for its emergence was people's belief that fictional characters could be in the real world. There are a lot of them out there, but getting people to really believe they're real is not the easiest task. With a little effort, he managed to come up with a detailed plan of how to try to do it. Its main point is to create the character himself. To do this, Charlie began a long work on a novel in the fantasy genre called Emperor Titan, where the main character created for himself. The most important thing in this case, in no way overdo it with the strength of the character, because if it will be too big, the hero will not be able to fully realize it. Well, of course, too weak too, you cannot do it, so you need to calculate everything to the smallest detail. For 2 years Charlie wrote 10,000 words every day and finally finished his novel. The ending was deliberately left open-ended to stir up a lot of discussion among fans about whether or not Oscar was able to get into the real world. First of all, The Tyrant Emperor is very popular because it is free, and after a minimum amount of time has fully met the expectations of its author, this story has already collected more than 10 million reads, and hundreds of millions of likes. It is also actively discussed among young people. But that wasn't enough for Charlie, so his next move was to make even more noise about the story. A bunch of bots were hired to push the story higher in the discussion. Thanks to this kind of action, it was able to make it into the top 10 best books of the last couple of years. Also, the man specifically did not attend various large events, which are usually attended by a lot of successful people, because many wanted to meet him personally. They came to these parties, and constantly asked each other why did not come Charlie, and thereby cause a fuss. It was by means of such hype that the man tried to make people believe that his character and all other events were absolutely true. Fortunately, as long as the novel is really popular, there will be people who will believe in it. There is still a little work to be done, and it will be possible to proceed to realization. After some time, Charlie was finally able to create a nucleus that could summon Oscar, and he was madly happy about it, because it had been too long. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the man to be ready to use it, an event that would definitely cause a furor in such a big city. The man's plan was simple: he summons a hero, and waits for the government to deal with him, then reaps the benefits. But as it turned out later, ordinary people are not as good as gods and accidents do happen. All the while Oscar stood in the doorway, and after seeing the memories he finally realized why he was here. Since Charlie was missing, Oscar did not think long and went to the girl, and asked what is going on here. In response to this, with tears in her eyes, she replied that it is none of her business, and she does not know anything at all. From all of the above, Guy is very interested in the phrase "it is none of my business," what it could mean. By the way, her name is Karina, and according to her, she really doesn't know anything about the fact that the man suddenly disappeared, because they weren't close. Charlie owed her money and she came here to get it back, because he's gone, so there's no money, and then the girl asked to be released. This reaction seemed rather strange for Oscar, because he was sure until the last that Karina would at least ask who he was, but according to her it was not so. Then the guy said openly that it was time to stop pretending, because he had all of Charlie's memories in his head. So at this point, the best option for her would be to tell the truth while Oscar was being kind. After saying that, the girl remembered that there was a sentence in Charlie's notes about the lack of a fantasy eater. It said the following: "If the author loses his life before the summoned character, there is a chance that the character will absorb his own memories and abilities, which is apparently what happened." Looking at the girl, Oscar noticed her eyes were racing. She must be thinking of something. Karina apologized for her lie and told all the information about herself. That was the least of Oscar's interests, so he asked her to get to the heart of the conversation as soon as possible, to tell the whole truth about herself and what had happened here. In fact, Karina is Charlie's employee, who was in charge of promoting the idea that the Tyrant Emperor's protagonist had broken the fourth wall and moved into modern times. She was in charge of all the people who left a lot of comments. But this fatty only paid the deposit and didn't pay the rest, so Karina had to hack into his computer and find out where he lived. So the girl really only came for the money. At one point Charlie insisted on showing her his superpower, and set Oscar's teleportation process in motion. Well, based on her memories, the girl really wasn't lying, but now Oscar wanted to hear at least one good reason to let Karina live on. She answered that if she hadn't come to pick up her money today, Charlie would probably have taken Oscar's life, and that would have been the end of it. In general, initially the fat man was going to summon Oscar somewhere on the street. With a 90% probability, the guy would be met by law enforcement, and for disobeying their instructions, most likely would open fire to kill. But since Karina came to visit, Charlie started the teleportation process earlier. So in fact the girl saved the guy's life, and it would be pretty stupid to thank her for it with some rudeness. To summarize, Charlie was just insanely screwed up. First of all, he made a mistake with the local summoning, and secondly, he couldn't even stop it, and so stupidly lost his life, his own power consuming him. When the story was over, the girl gently asked whether she deserved to live for her deed or not. Oscar answered that Karina knew too much for some reason, after a detailed analysis of the memories, he realized that the girl should not understand everything so well. Actually, Karina said more than she had to because she thought it would improve her chances of survival, but apparently it wasn't the right thing to do. Well, I'm going to have to tell it all, because there's nothing left to lose. As it turned out, Charlie had one habit: he liked to record everything on his computer. Since Karina hacked it, quite by accident she managed to find out not only the address but also his secret plans, and with them the superpowers that the man so much hid about. After a few minutes of silence, the girl finally admitted that the debt objection was just an excuse to come over. She actually came over to see if his abilities were real, and in case they were real, to team up to make a fortune together. Because the truth is that Karina also has her own ability, and it's a perfect match with the fantasy eater. Since Oscar has literally just become the owner of this very skill, he of course asked the girl to demonstrate how they match so much. Initially, only one hand was covered in bright flames, and a little later the flames completely engulfed her body. After just a snap of her fingers, the room the boys were in was transformed into Oscar's chambers. To say that the guy was shocked is just not to say anything. Certainly some of the details may be different, but according to Charlie's description and his materials, these chambers should be as similar to the original as possible. In general, the girl's ability is called hologram. She can create an illusion out of absolute emptiness not distinguishable from reality. Also, all this illusion can be recorded on camera because it is not limited in limits or people. The hologram is visible but not tangible. It would be a good idea to use it to create realistic video clips, and in case the guys wanted to summon any of the characters, they wouldn't have to bother as much as Charlie did. To be honest, they could start right now. Karina had even had time to choose a few directions. If we go into this in more detail, Oscar can become a lord not only in his kingdom, but also in thousands of other worlds. The guy confirmed that it is very true that such an illusion hides the reality so that he does not even see the flaws. The only problem with this hologram is that it can't withstand the real power, and at the slightest contact it starts to collapse. Objectively speaking, Oscar is here for the first time, and is not yet fully familiar with superpowers, and he also doesn't want to repeat Charlie's mistakes, let alone work for someone else's pocket. In response, Karina threw her hands up in the air and said she hadn't even thought about it. Oscar was aware that she really hadn't lied to him all this time, and said that for such honesty the girl really deserved praise. In this world, the guy is just short of a loyal servant, which is exactly the position he decided to give to Karina. To be honest, the girl was not very excited about such a position, but there was nowhere to go. Also, in Oscar's opinion, she is beautiful but not as good as his favorite concubine, so he is not going to have fun with her. Well, as they say, at least thanks for that. After analyzing the situation, the girl concluded that in fact everything is not so bad. At least Oscar no longer wants to take her life, and is going to keep her around, which is also not less important. From now on, it can be said with certainty that Karina's life is safe. A little later, Oscar used one of his skills on her. It was a spell called heart removal. The guy can't let his servant do anything he doesn't want her to do. With such a drastic act, he will be able to completely control the girl and know all her actions ahead of time. Also, from now on, in case Karina stops obeying, she will suffer terrible pain. Roughly speaking, now her whole life is solely in the hands of the Emperor. Purely in theory, it is a musical can learn to resist, but so far the girl does not even roughly understand how to do it. First of all, Oscar ordered her new servant to prepare his robes, and then to bring him food and wine so that he could feel at least a little bit at home. At this point, Karina almost cried, because she had expected a partnership in the first place, and ended up being immediately demoted to a maid. Planet Earth is home to several million people, the so-called cradle of civilization. Of all the great civilizations, the Zhongzhou have the longest history. Specifically about them, there are many legends about their great battles, victories, and defeats. These legends are still passed down by word of mouth to this day. Everything went on exactly like this until the last traditional feudal Shun dynasty fell into decline, itself swept away by modern industry, and the inhabitants welcomed a new era. At this point, the Zhongzhou Empire, a modern state with a constitutional monarchy. This is one of the greatest countries on the entire planet. This is such a brief history of this world, it fully corresponds to the information that fell into Oscar's consciousness at the moment of transition through the portal. In fact, the guy conquered the whole world, created a great Spain, but in fact it all turned out to be a regular story and not for real. According to Charlie's recollections, Charlie is now in Shinshui City. It's one of the most dangerous cities in the entire empire. Charlie only moved here about a year ago. His plan was to take advantage of the turmoil in the city to kill Oscar, because in order for the Fantasy Eater's ability to work, the summoned character and the Eater must not be too far away from each other, or he will not be able to get the character's powers even if he loses his life. Charlie was a really heady guy, but by accident Karina ruined his brilliant plan, and thus saved Oscar's life. When crossing the gate, the guy didn't get any notifications about superpowers. Certainly there's plenty of information on the internet about it. But the problem is that it's all confusing, and it's quite difficult to figure out where the truth is and where the lies are. By the way, after the conversation, Oscar realized that even though Karina had superpowers, her knowledge was very limited. Then the man asked, "At what point did she awaken her superpower?" Last winter the girl went to the hot springs, and the water was so good that she accidentally fell asleep and lost consciousness there. Until Karina was found lying in the water unconscious was almost a whole night. If she was found even a little later, with a probability of 100% she would have lost her life. Based on this story, we can assume that the main condition for getting superpowers is to get into some emergency situation, but at least for now no one can confirm this information for sure. When all this happened to the girl, she was insanely happy, and immediately began to look for information about it. At one point Oscar thought about a very important question: what is his real power in this world? Because if you believe the official information, he is able to single-handedly resist an entire army. But is it really so? Because if you compare with the information that is available on the internet, there are a lot of questions. But also do not forget that most people on the internet are braggarts who are always trying to prove something to each other. In this case, there is nothing left but to independently test their abilities. As suddenly Karina informs that she has bought things for Oscar, and booked a table in the most luxurious restaurant. Also they will not even have to walk, because a luxury car will come for them. In response to this guy said that hurry me where to go, it is better to walk and explore the city. But in the end, the girl still persuaded him, at least to get to the restaurant by car. Like a true faithful maid, upon arrival at the place, she immediately ran to open the door for her master. Thank God Oscar at least allowed to call him boss, because in public Your Majesty sounded rather strange. As soon as the guy got out of the car, he immediately began to pay attention to a large number of girls, because first of all, outwardly he is very handsome, and Karina picked up for him just the perfect suit. Even the men who came with their wives started to get jealous. Looking at all this from the outside, Karina made a conclusion that apparently Oscar really does not realize how outstanding he is created. Even when they were just walking on the street, at one point all the passers-by stopped, and could not take their eyes off the guy. Even in this situation, most of the passers-by began to condemn Karina for acting like a useless assistant. After all, such an important person should not tell her what to do. In their minds they couldn't understand how Oscar could hire such a cold girl, so they started marking her place. Suddenly, the very ladies who were not nice remarks in the direction of Karina began to scream loudly, because on the body of one of them appeared a snake, and on the second a large number of rats. But in fact, all this was not real, so the girl just decided to take revenge, and created a similar hologram. When the guys finally got inside the establishment, they were greeted by a beautiful lady in a gorgeous red dress, and introduced herself as the manager of the restaurant. By the way, the internet wrote that the manager is really just a candy. Now when Karina saw her with her own eyes, she was convinced that this is the real truth. When the guys got to know each other a bit, Karina asked to take them to a pre-booked private room, to which the manager kindly agreed. As soon as the maid went to another room to wash her hands, Anna briefly thought about it, and started to hit on Oscar and tried to get close to him in every way possible. Of course, the guy had almost no reaction, because he had already told too many stories like hers in his life. As soon as Karina came back, Anna said she had only come into the room to pour a glass of wine for Mr. Oscar on behalf of the restaurant. When this beautiful lady left the room, Karina immediately recommended for Oscar to leave her for a private conversation, because frankly speaking, the guy was definitely interested in her. The girl realized it with the help of her intuition. In response, the guy said he already had her number. Karina asked the guy if Anna had any chance of becoming his concubine. To become a concubine, it is not enough to have the appearance of the first beauty in the country. You must be full of dignity, majesty, and fearlessness. Then, 5 minutes later, the girl was curious to know, since Oscar was here, he must already know what he wanted to realize in the first place. But as it turned out, this was not the case. So far, the man was only thinking about it, and did not suggest what was the purpose of his stay here. In this case, Karina decided to tell us a little bit about life in this world. Unfortunately, it is not as simple as it may seem at first glance. Certainly the country in which the boys live is quite strong, but despite this everyone is still afraid of the kitchen knife. Karina also had a proposal to create a special company where Oscar, relying on his skills to manage the state, will become a tycoon in a matter of minutes, because a business empire is also a kind of empire. For some reason, despite the fact that the girl kept saying something, in response Oscar just kept silent, and did not show any activity at all, as if he expected something bad to happen. At one point the guy uttered the phrase "finally showed up," and glass was nailed by a sniper rifle bullet. Since Oscar realized that it would happen, he was in complete control of the situation, and did not even move from his seat, unlike Karina, who just fell to the floor. The guy was so calm that he even managed to catch the bullet flying at a great speed right next to his head with his bare hands. The sniper who fired the shot was, to put it mildly, in shock, because he had never in his life, never seen that the man who was in his sights, with just one hand caught his bullet, and sat on as if nothing had happened, when there was a pile of broken glass and a frightened servant girl around. Meanwhile, Oscar decided not to sit idle, tightly gripped the bullet with his hand, and with all his might threw it in the opposite direction. The speed of flight was only great that the bandit did not have time to react and lost his life on the spot. But you gotta hand it to the bandit, because he waited until Oscar was distracted before he fired a shot, but luckily even that didn't help him. Then Karina finally woke up and immediately asked what that was all about. But instead of answering normally, Oscar took the girl in his arms and jumped right out the broken window. She flew to the very roof from which the sniper had fired the shot, to get to know him better, and maybe even to take his rifle for herself, because such things are not on the road. When the girl saw that sniper will not go signs of life, she was shocked to say the least, because she realized that Oscar really caught the bullet with his hands and sent it right back into the head. For sniper, it really deserves respect. Oscar had originally planned to just threaten, but this guy was extremely unlucky. Even in this situation, fate itself decided to take his life. After a while, Karina seemed to start going crazy. Her eyes lit up with a bright light, and she started laughing loudly and nonstop. When the girl calmed down a bit, she said that she was madly glad that she had come to this beautiful city today, because she had never felt as good as she felt right now. In her opinion, it was just an amazing day, and the beginning of something very grand. Today Karina saw the power of superpowers with her own eyes, ruled the day in a luxury she could not even dream of, and had a great dinner without paying a penny. What could be better? Looking at it all from the outside, Oscar realized that she wasn't afraid of blood and loss of life. It's a quality he values among his servants. Karina admitted that she loves to sit on any bake sites, but today she was finally lucky enough to see with her own eyes the body of the sniper lying on the floor. But now the question arises why this bandit was following Oscar. In reply to this, the fellow said it was all Charlie's doing. He had recently taken a large loan on himself, and had announced a good cash reward for Oscar's head, which was why nearly all the mercenaries of this town had decided to take up the cause, and try to fulfill it. all of which is a direct indication, to put it mildly, that there will be repeated attempts to destroy Oscar in the near future, and not just once. In that case, Karina suggested a change in appearance. Of course, the guy's pretty strong, but there's no shame in keeping yourself safe. Unfortunately, Oscar refused such a tempting offer, because in his opinion it was not necessary. The man then asked if the head of this state, or the ruling family, would be afraid of an assassination attempt, or not. Karina suggested that they would not because they are very high-ranking people. And in general, who can dare to cross their path? Just like in Oscar's case, why should he be afraid of anyone? As long as he has power, no one will dare to touch him. The guy really wanted to let the sniper live to spread rumors about his power, but unfortunately it doesn't matter, what's done is done. A little analyzing tonight, the girl finally realized that Oscar specifically asked to lead him around the neighborhood just to attract these are the hired hands. In the end, he confirmed that this is indeed the case, but there will be no reward for the guess, because it's too late. Oscar also didn't like the fact that Charlie's house was a mess, so he asked Karina to find a decent place to stay. When the booking process was successfully completed, the receptionist shook Karina and the young man good night. For some reason, this statement seemed a little strange to the girl. Probably the receptionist just thought that she and Alex were a couple. After a few minutes of conversation, the man asked her to come to him as soon as possible. She quickly disconnected from the conversation and said she would be right there. This time, Oscar wanted a gentle massage from the maid during the bath, for a complete relaxation after such a hard day. The girl was so much worried that the gentleman liked everything, that literally every 5 minutes she asked him if it was normal. In response, he said that it was too gentle, but nevertheless he liked it. When the massage was over, next time Karina suggested to invite a real masseuse. But the reaction to such a proposal was quite negative, because Oscar believes that all these call women are not worthy to touch his body, yes, and in general, he really liked how Karina worked today, so in the future the guy wants it to continue. In that case, Karina decided to inform that after every trip to an expensive restaurant, or staying in an expensive hotel, the treasury would be considerably empty, and it would not be enough to maintain such a level of life for a long time. If it was not replenished, in about a month the guys would not be able to afford to live like that anymore. In this case, in order not to feel a sense of duty, Oscar decided to gift his maid, but for this she would need to take off her towel. Of course, after this phrase the girl panicked, because at least she did not understand why she should take off her clothes to receive a gift. Because the situation seemed completely hopeless, the girl with a sad look on her face began to beg Oscar to take his time, because she was not ready for this kind of gifted. In response, the guy laughed loudly, and said that he was just going to give her the technique, but for towels you can make a mistake. Oscar also reminded that he had warned in advance about any touching of his maids. He was not interested in it at all, and he did not even think about it. After these words, Karina's joy was unbounded, because in her head she had already thought of the worst scenarios. Also in response to this, the maid added that she was a girl after all, and by such a suggestion Oscar had really embarrassed her a lot. But anyway, all that was required was simply not to talk nonsense, put the towel aside, and in no way interfered during the gifting process. As soon as it started, the room was filled with a bright blue light. The girl began to feel an incredible warmth, and all the fatigue was gone. Oscar transferred some chi energy to her, because he couldn't afford to let the maid be weak, so the energy channels would be unblocked and the technique would be transferred first. Its peculiarity lies in the fact that if a girl starts practicing well, she will be able to master it quite quickly, and without any problems to use it at any suitable moment. Now Karina has definitely made sure that she did not follow Oscar in vain, and is already beginning to reap the benefits of communication with him. After 15 minutes, the chi energy began to completely fill the entire void, the soul gradually cleansed to perfection, and the whole thing moved in a circle. The guy also insisted that Karina repeat after him, but because it felt too good, not that she couldn't repeat, it was hard to even sit up. This happens when an ordinary person takes chi for the first time, and then you will feel unusual to some extent. Pretty soon the girl should get used to it, But now she must find the strength to get up and continue to the victorious end. In no case should not stop halfway through. After another 2 hours or so, Karina was already starting to lose her mood, because she still had no solid results. Was she so stupid that she couldn't handle elementary things, next to such a great master? To be honest, even Oscar can't figure out what's wrong, because he's given her the easiest path to success. Even kids can learn it in just a couple hours. Karina is smart, and she's already mastered basic skills, but after the guy gave her the chi, something went wrong. If the techniques from the other world could not be applied to ordinary people, that was the only logical explanation so far. But even though Oscar's assumptions were so sad, the girl was still of the opinion that she should try harder, and everything would work out for sure. But anyway, Karina is still very grateful, even though she can't train. Receiving the secret technique is like getting a new body. It feels very nice and light. In that case, Oscar said that giving the technique was only part of the reward and asked what else the maid wanted. After these words, Karina began to rejoice much more. She did not even think that the gentleman could be so generous. But this time it was decided to say directly, "Really, girl wants a large amount of money, power, and always be a priority for men." Certainly very ambitious wishes, but no matter how it is, Karina is still too young, so it's too early for her to be in great demand from men. Power to give out in half an hour cannot get, but about the money can talk. For starters, Oscar ordered his maid to take a bath, and then tell you where to get them. In this case, the girl purposely washed as quickly as possible, in order to get to the conversation as soon as possible. At this time Oscar was already waiting for her in the room, and as soon as Irina approached, he immediately turned to her laptop and asked to read one very interesting post, in which some very high-ranking person made negative remarks about the novel that Charlie wrote, and also claimed that if the main character really moved to the real world, the author of the post is ready to fight with him. First of all, it sounds very funny, and secondly, as a not bad option to make money. The next day, the events take place in Manhua, the eastern district of District 14. There, a young guy named Kevin catches up with an old acquaintance and asks him to do him a small favor. The thing is that he committed a small offense and accidentally pissed off the Blue Dragon gang, so he asks to cover him for a couple of days. Also, the poor guy promises that it's only 2 to 3 days at the most. As soon as everything is ready, he will leave town and won't bother anyone else. In response to this, the man said that if the guy has committed a really small offense, he will definitely give him a helping hand. But as it turned out, the East District Chief was already aware of the incident, and he was also well aware that Kevin had in fact committed more than a minor offense, so there's no easy way to get away with it. At the same moment, a whole bunch of armed men run into the building, and Kevin immediately realized everything. The fact that the man he wanted to ask for help just ratted him out, and thus decided to get rid of the problem. Also, according to him, the guy himself is guilty of leading a tale, and dragging others into their problems is not the way out. Despite the fact that there were too many armed men, Kevin was not going to give up so easily, so he tried to fight back, and frankly speaking, he is even very good at it. The opponents fell off one by one, but when they became too many, Kevin did not think long, decided to try to escape. These guys were so pissed off, primarily because Kevin had stolen something that belonged to their boss, so they just had to stop him at all costs, and punish him to the full extent of the street law. There at one point, the guy had gotten so far out of line that he just hit a dead end. To get out of this awkward situation, he did not think of anything better than to knock the wall out with a fist punch. Strange as it may sound, but he still succeeded. Then came the second moment. As the floor was high, it was dangerous to jump down, but even so Kevin just took a step forward. After landing, the young man felt very well how most of his bones were hurt in the moment. Now after such a blow he needs some time to recover and continue his journey. Just as suddenly some lady walked up to him outside and started clapping her hands loudly. To be honest, she was surprised when she finally saw with her own eyes the blow of a person with level 8 enhancement. Not everyone can break through the wall. By the way, the name of this beautiful Katerina, she is the head of the Blue Dragon gang. Just from them Kevin tried to escape. Taking advantage of this unique opportunity, the girl decided to make fun of her rival a little and show him a couple of new receivers. Meanwhile, Oscar and Karina were on the road, all the while the maid with the help of the internet trying to find where the author of the post. After a while, she managed to figure out the IP address, and if you look at the maps, then this mysterious man is one of the members of the Blue Dragon gang. In this case, the guys assume that it is probably the work of Katerina, because among them she is the only one who likes to speak out loudly on the internet. In general, Karina knows nothing about her, but thanks to the internet managed to break down at least some magical information. Katerina is the only daughter of the previous head of the gang. From childhood she was given high hopes, so she was brought up as an heiress, and as a martial arts star. Her father also created movie characters based on her image and filmed them in order to build up his daughter's reputation. It doesn't matter whether it's firearms or hand-to-hand combat, she's good at everything. Let's just say she's fully up to her status as the head of the organization. Meanwhile, the fight between Kevin and Katerina is gaining momentum. The man is doing his best to attack, and the girl in turn is very good at defense. But when she uses her superpower, the fight is over very quickly, unexpectedly for everyone. The manly fellow was lying on the floor begging for mercy, although he had literally just been full of strength and energy. When the girl reached back to her headquarters, she immediately picked up her phone and called Johnson, to apologize for the great noise, while trying to catch Kevin. Also as compensation, she left a small gift on his table, and asked very strongly to accept it. In response to this, with a smile on his face, the man said that young people are very impulsive and can't always calculate their strength, so he asked her to be a little more careful next time. In the meantime, Kevin's interrogation has been going on for an hour, during which time he has only been able to confess to the theft, but he still won't say where he hid the stolen items. In that case, Katerina decided to go through his phone, see if there's anything interesting there. In the process, the girl discovered that the guy reads short stories. For starters, she asked him if it was true, and when Kevin confirmed it, she delivered a fist punch right on his stomach, because she just can't stand men who read these children's stories at night. And especially strongly she was outraged by the fact that he reads The Tyrant Emperor. After all, in her opinion, the whole story is complete nonsense, and it is completely incomprehensible how it became popular. A little later, Katerina remembered that in the novel the main character had some kind of a blow of the infernal dragon with a force of several tons. In this case, the girl decided to demonstrate what she was capable of, and delivered 10 blows at once in 1 second. In her opinion, such a skill is not even close to the blow of a hell dragon. In the end, as it was to be expected, Kevin just passed out, because he had already gotten a very good beating. At the same moment, with just the help of the fists, someone breaks through the wall at Catherine's secret headquarters, and immediately questioned who was here making relentless negative comments about other people. As it turns out, it's Oscar and Karina, finally reaching their destination on the map. The girl was shocked to say the least, that someone with such a noise dared to come to the territory of the Blue Dragon. In response to this, Karina said that it was not necessary behind her back to pour dirt on the Emperor, but since it happened, it's time to answer for all his above words in that post. To be honest, the mercenaries at that moment did not understand anything at all. At least they were very interested in why Oscar was called Emperor. Karina noticed the interest in their eyes, so she decided to tell them that next to her stood the great Emperor, the successor of the ruling dynasty, and a brilliant leader. At this point, the guys didn't even know how to react, so they just laughed, because they couldn't believe that the main character of the novel had moved to the real world. According to the enemies at this point, they're facing 2 fans of the novel who are just cosplaying Oscar. Then Karina found the post on the internet and showed it to Katerina. When the head of the gang confirmed that it was she who wrote the post, the maid billed her because she had done a lot of damage to Oscar and negatively affected other people with her words. And let's add moral compensation. In the end, if you add it all up, it's about 10 million in damages. The mercenaries started laughing loudly, but Katerina, for some reason, was not laughing. She asked everyone to shut up and leave the room as soon as possible, because she would deal with everything else personally. After such an order, the mercenaries had a lot of questions, but of course no one risked to ask them out loud. To be honest, Katerina didn't really understand what was going on in the minds of these fans, especially those as twisted as these. Did they really want to restore justice, or was it just an excuse? In response, the guy said that he was the real Oscar, and this time he didn't come for justice at all. He just had difficulties with money at the moment, and he was lucky to see this offensive post. Well, in that case, the issue of money will be discussed after the fight. This confident lady's first strike was easily blocked. Then Katerina truly felt that it was very much like the dragon's protective aura. But however it was, she still didn't fully believe that it was the real Oscar standing in front of her, and not some mock-up of him. One thing is for sure, the guy is awakened, but at this point it's hard to tell what his ability is. In the meantime, Oscar is almost openly demonstrating everything he can do, duplicating all the techniques that were prescribed in the novel to prove that he is real. But apparently, until he defeats her in a duel, she's not going to believe it, because Katerina is 100% sure that right now she can prove to the world that moving from the novel to the real world is nothing more than a fairy tale, and there's no way to do it. After a few more minutes of endless blocking blows, Oscar's nerves reached their limit, and he decided to strike back, after which the girl promptly flew to the side, and with the help of her body broke through the stone wall. Maybe at least after that she will come to a real realization of the situation. After that, the guy reminded Katerina that he can hit his enemy with a blow weighing several tons, and of course can do it with high speed, but unfortunately such power served not as a signal to stop, but on the contrary caused even more excitement in Katerina and forced to use skills. Looking at her, Oscar realized that at the moment he was facing a dragon-like man. He couldn't call her weak. Katerina realized that she had really underestimated her opponent, because she had thought that his abilities were a kind of energy management, and nothing more. For now, Katerina is comforted by the fact that the guy is fast, but it's not the speed of sound, so there is still a chance to beat him. The funny thing about this fight is that the girl is not embarrassed by the fact that she hasn't been able to break Oscar's protective dome yet, and continues to strike into the void. At one point the gentleman purposely disappeared right in front of her, so that the rival's hand went deep under the ground and got stuck there. This allowed him to take a favorable position for a kick, right on the head. Also, the guy reminded her that if he wanted to, he could dodge the blow at any time, but he doesn't like to do it. Of course, in order to somehow protect herself, the girl put a block with her second hand, but frankly speaking, it helped her quite poorly. The guy deliberately pulled the intrigue a little, said a couple of affectionate words and finished what he had started. After which a huge funnel appeared in the ground, in which Katerina was lying. Also during the fight, Oscar had managed to block all her chi points, so the best option for her would be to just lie on the floor and not move. When the fight was officially over, Oscar asked his opponent why she was so hostile to him, since he had done nothing to her. Unfortunately, the girl could not give a decent answer to this question, because she didn't really understand why she hated people so much. But since Oscar had defeated her in a fair fight, she said that now he could do anything to her, even destroy her completely. Of course, insulting the Lord is a great sin, but the guy was not going to do anything wrong, because at least he admired her strength, then used a spell to remove her heart, and asked if the girl is ready to become his subordinate. Of course she could not refuse. Meanwhile, two mercenaries were sitting on the street and talking among themselves. One of them was very sorry that he did not bring a gun, because then he would have just fired a shot, and that would have ended the life of the intruders, because no one has the right to enter the territory of the bandit group of the Blue Dragons so much. To be honest, my colleague didn't really share the desire to shoot anyone, because at least at the moment, everything downstairs is rattling and shaking like an earthquake. The guy who broke into the building is definitely unusual. It's not that simple in this town. If you hurt the wrong person, the Blue Dragon might be gone. Also, looking at the car that was parked near the entrance, the guys reasoned when their boss had time to change the car. But then to them came the realization that it is the car of the same white-haired guy, because their boss recently checked all her money for some need, but just could not. By the way, if you get a good look, you can see that someone has placed a remote bomb on the bottom of the car. Meanwhile, back on the battlefield, the guys kind of finally come to a common denominator. Katerina is taught how to properly address Oscar, and is allowed to move again. By the way, she still thinks the guy's just playing a role, and it's not real. But at least the girl is very surprised that Oscar can paralyze her body in an instant, and then let her move again. As soon as the guy orders them to follow him, the girls immediately turn around and start moving. On the way, Karina told her new friend that she doesn't need to consider herself special just because she has superpowers. After all, the girl has them too, and besides, she joined Oscar earlier, so she can safely be called Katerina's boss. Well, it makes sense that whoever follows this man can't be ordinary. Although Karina looks harmless, but in fact has a powerful superpower. Half an hour into the journey, Oscar turned to his new maid, and said that she does not need to disband his gang. The guy in no way will not interfere, but for this girl will be obliged to pay 4% of the entire monthly income. In principle, such a turn of events, Katerina even very much liked. Of course, she became Oscar's subordinate, but still remains free, except for a small monthly payment. To familiarize herself with the rest of the requirements, the girl will have to contact Karina directly. The man then asked how Katerina had managed to awaken and how long ago it had happened. She replied that it had happened relatively recently. She had been injected with an awakening drug only a few months ago, which at least suggests that the girl had not awakened her superpowers on her own. To become what she is, they had to spend as much as 30 million and make a lot of connections. Because the procedure was already too expensive, there was almost nothing left of the gang's budget. It took a lot of effort to get this drug at least on the black market. It can also be that after payment a person will receive a defective drug. The probability of a successful transaction is about 40%, because it can be that the human body simply cannot withstand, and instead of waking up simply lose his life. The guys were surprised, to say the least, that given such a small percentage, Katerina decided to try it on herself. It's not easy in the underworld, and if you're afraid of something, you can lose your life much faster than from some awakening drug. Based on this story, Oscar assumed that the girl is quite close to people who also have superpowers, but personally, Katerina believes that for the most part she is just familiar with them, and if we talk frankly, then even though the person has his own abilities, to establish a connection with him is not so simple. So far Oscar doesn't care about them, but at least he strongly wishes to find them, to communicate at least a little, and to learn some interesting information. Katerina then decided to ask what superpowers Oscar and Karina had. The guy has already answered this question, but he will repeat it for the last time. His powers are called secret techniques, not superpowers. Katerina decided to refrain from answering and said that her skills are a secret. In that case, Katerina put her hands up and said she would never ask anything about it again. In her head, she couldn't stop thinking that Oscar wanted to meet people from the guild, which sounds very grand. She also assumed that these two are in a relationship, because from the outside they don't look like friends, maybe a boss and a secretary. After a little analysis of the last duel, Katerina began to theorize that the bottomless abyss she saw was actually an illusion. Most likely these guys are fighting in a pair. Oscar controls all the energy and power, and Karina secretly helps him and slowly drives the opponent crazy. Anyway, it's just a theory. Now Katerina's main task is to listen to Oscar's orders and stay out of their problems, because then she won't have time to deal with her own. Well, it's getting late. It's time to go back to the hotel. The main thing is for Katerina to solve the financial issue. Katerina asked for the guy's bank account number and said that she would transfer 5 million there. But as they say, Karina only needed to know the phone number, and she would do it all herself in 2 minutes, which is basically what happened. Now it's no wonder that she so easily managed to find out where is the headquarters of the Blue Dragon, because the girl is a real hacker, and is well versed in his work. Then the guys gathered with one more problem. On the account of Katerina was not enough money, so it was decided to make installments. Meanwhile, As soon as Oscar got into the car, he immediately sensed something wrong, but unfortunately it was too late. The bomb detonated almost instantly and blew up the car with it. At first, because of the strong shock, the girls did not even know how to react. Then, a little analyzing the situation, Karina realized that the fuel tank could not have exploded with such force. Most likely the car was booby-trapped, and if she went after him, she would most likely lose her life. What a violent development of events! Katerina had just met her boss, and he had already been blown up. Suddenly, in the midst of these huge flames, a silhouette of a man slowly begins to emerge. Karina was very happy, because she realized that most likely it was Oscar, and he managed to survive. The guy really underestimated the modern weapons. If they were a special technique that allows you to control the flames, it was all over. Frankly speaking, Oscar has not felt so humiliated for quite a long time. His anger was simply no limit. A strong desire for revenge is gradually beginning to take over. Katerina was shocked at how terrifyingly powerful the boy was, looking at it from the outside. In time he transformed himself into a huge wild beast, froze in place, and waited for the moment to begin destroying his enemy. Katerina immediately put her hands up and asked if Oscar suspected her of this dastardly crime, to which the man replied that he knew it was not her doing. Then he asked Karina to tell her about the mercenaries hunting the guy. For some reason, a man put a bounty on the internet for Oscar's destruction. At this point, he's already dead, but he left behind some problems that he still has to deal with today. Katerina confirmed that such an internet ad is a real problem, then asked what the boss plans to do next. Of course, it would be rude not to reciprocate, but first we need to investigate the explosion and find out exactly who did it. The next day, Karina came to her master with good news. She finally managed to find out who dared to booby-trap the car. Well, it's one local hooligan from the 18th district. The security cameras had caught him sneakily planting the bomb and leaving the scene. Then Oscar asked the maid to check this guy's phone and banking history to see who he was interacting with. Because it could be that he was forced to do it by another gun, in which case we're gonna have to find out who was holding the gun. After checking the database, Karina managed to find out that a large sum of money had recently been deposited into the criminal's account. You can also try to check who is the ruler, but it may take some time, at least if you take a local bandit hostage, then at gunpoint he will definitely tell all the information. Oscar haters, meanwhile, were summarizing the results of their meeting tonight. The first failure could be called an ordinary individual case. Sniper, the newcomer, was quite inattentive during his part-time job on the side, lost his life at the hands of a man with a superpower. The responsibility for this is entirely on his shoulders. During the investigation of the incident, the guys gave a rough estimate of the superpowered man's strength. And at the same time, they organized another major assassination attempt that was supposed to be perfect, but because the man was too strong, also failed. Now they could say with certainty that this target had exceeded all their expectations, and one team could no longer handle it. Against this backdrop, suggestions began to be made to stop the operation immediately. Because 500,000 is not enough, this case is worth more. But one of the members of the team opposed. In his opinion, money is not a problem. Do not forget that for the entire life of the organization, this is the first assignment to destroy the superhuman. So to establish themselves well, the office must perform this without options. Since this office doesn't employ people with superpowers, it's normal for them to be inferior in strength. Tyson, for example, as a man with powers, sees the situation much more clearly. There's no need to be afraid and embarrass yourself, because people who hunt other people shouldn't know the word fear. To remedy the situation, he suggested using a chemical gas bomb to destroy the target. The most important thing in this case is to plant it discreetly in the hotel where Oscar lives. To be safe, Tyson said he would supervise the operation personally, and then it would be a sure thing. But if the target manages to escape this time too, Tyson promised to personally destroy Oscar with his sword. Because if he did, it would prove the utter helplessness of such a large organization. When the alarm sounds, it means that once again some intruder has entered a restricted area. This town really deserves its reputation, because almost every day someone gets it into their head to break in here and make the organization work. In this case, Tyson asked to show the cameras, because he was very curious about what kind of rat had entered the territory again. At the same time, it would be possible to fully test the new fortifications. As it turned out later, 3 people invaded the territory at once, and strangely enough, it was Oscar, Katerina, and Karina. And to be frank, they didn't sneak in, they just invaded right through the main entrance. By the way, despite the fact that they're in top-secret territory, they feel pretty confident, like they're going to come in right now and establish their own order.